That's still moving.
Mhm. Oh yeah, I'm sure. Okay, it's 12:02, so we're going to begin. It is really with the greatest pleasure that we bring you the third lecture in the McGill Palliative Care National Grand Rounds series with the generous support of 9 local hospital foundations, our hospital adjacent foundations, and Pallium Canada. We intend that this initiative builds on the historic contributions by McGill University to the field of palliative care by providing a novel means to disseminate the latest innovation, research, and ideas in our field to places across Canada and beyond who may not typically have access to the types of speakers who typically present within the walls of our academic institutions. So before welcoming Sarah Saber-Friedman to introduce this lecture named in honor of Sheila Kussner, we wish to acknowledge the land on which this lecture is given. Following Ms. Friedman, my colleague and the National Grand Rounds course director, Dr. Stephanie Gingras, will walk us through some of our accreditation-related information for this lecture and the lecture series, and then we'll get started with our lecturer.
Bonjour tout le monde. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Saber-Friedman. I'm the Interim Executive Director of Hope & Cope, L'Espoir c'est la vie. Sheila Kussner, who passed away just last summer, was a visionary philanthropist and a cancer survivor who founded Hope & Cope in 1981. She was instrumental in shaping community-based, peer-led psychosocial cancer support, and her groundbreaking work transformed oncology care in Montreal and beyond. Sheila was a leading voice in the reestablishment of oncology as a distinct discipline at McGill University. Among many other innovations, she opened the first hospital-affiliated cancer wellness center in Quebec, and her commitment to research resulted in the creation of the Christine and Herschel Victor Hope & Cope Chair in Psychosocial Oncology. Sheila's exceptional contributions earned her numerous accolades, including Officer of the Order of Canada, Officer of the Order of Quebec, and Commander of the Order of Montreal. We have the pleasure of welcoming Jim Mulcahy, volunteer advocate for cancer patients and families, who has brought so much to communities across Canada.
Thank you, Sarah. The members of this committee and their relevant declarations include Dr. Justin Sanders, who has relationships with La Maison Saint-Raphael and the American Society of Clinical Oncology, and who has received honoraria and grants in recent years from the Oklahoma University of Health Sciences, the Oregon Health Sciences University, and Pancreatic Cancer Canada. Dr. Argyri Tsimikalis, who discloses a relationship with and grants from the Shriners Hospital for Children. Dr. Olivia Nguyen, who acknowledges an association with la Société québécoise des médecins de soins palliatifs and a research subvention from la chaire de la famille Blanchard pour l'enseignement de la recherche en soins palliatifs. Dr. Naomi Goloff, who reports relationship with the Canadian Society of Palliative Medicine and grants from the Kindred Foundation and from l'Association québécoise de soins palliatifs. Dr. Zelda Freitas, who indicates grants from the Center for Caregiving Excellence and relationships with Nova Montreal and the Canadian Center for Caregiving Excellence. And Doctors Janelle Marie Walsh, Aurel Schuker, and myself, who have no conflict of interest to declare. This is simply just what I just told you. This series includes sponsorship from the Cedars Cancer Foundation, the Hope and Cope Wellness Center, the Jewish General Hospital Foundation, the Montreal General Hospital Foundation, the Montreal Neurological Institute, the MUHC Foundation, Pallium Canada, St. Mary's Hospital Foundation, Montreal Institute for Palliative Care, a branch of the Teresa de la Palliative Care Residence, and the Montreal Children's Hospital Foundation. A special thanks to the Department of Family Medicine at McGill University for their in-kind support. Here, we simply present a strategy to mitigate potential bias. The overall program learning objectives are as follows: to review innovative approaches for the implementation of palliative care in different settings, to assess strategies to address the most important challenges in palliative care today, and to appraise the latest research in the field of palliative care. We have the pleasure of welcoming Jim Mulcahy, a cancer patient, caregiver, and advocate, who was recently awarded a special mention for the 2024 Thérèse Gascrin Lifelong Achievement Award as part of the Canada Volunteer Awards. Jim has served on a wide variety of committees at the local, provincial, and national levels, focused on enhancing quality hospice and palliative care, and he continues to personally volunteer in the palliative care ward and the chemotherapy clinic at St. Martha's Hospital in Nova Scotia. He believes that quality hospice and palliative care provides an exemplary model of civility and compassion in an increasingly fractious world. We're very grateful to have Jim as the inaugural speaker of the Sheila Kussner Hope and Cope Lecture. Mesdames et Messieurs, Jim Mulcahy.
You can't hold and read at the same time.
I don't know if it can be moved.
Sure.
What's that?
Well, right.
What? Do it like this. Is that okay?
You gonna stand here?
Stand by me.
You didn't expect this at all. I will start, but if any of you are of the same generation as I am, you will understand that you reach a point where you forget everything. Okay, I spend most of my time lost in my house. You know, you go downstairs, you don't know why you're there. And I spend a lot of my time trying to find my glasses. So I found my glasses. So out of courtesy to you, I'm going to read this. Is that okay? Okay, thank you. Let me read this. Okay. So my name is Jim Mulcahy. Thank you for inviting me here. I just had a wonderful conversation with the staff members from Hope and Cope. They convinced me that I should continue with this address because I was nervous that perhaps I didn't have anything of value to say. I asked some of them to sit up front and some of them did. So I'll pay you later. Okay. Okay. I come from a very small town in Nova Scotia where university at one end, hospital at the other end, and a 10-minute walk in between. I tried walking in Montreal last night for 10 minutes and I couldn't tell where I was and where it would end. And I had to turn around quickly, okay, for fear of losing it all. So you can appreciate I'm somewhat disoriented. But isn't that nice? You see the print over there? That's by Robert Pope. He's the Haligonian. He had the same oncologist as I did. He died from the same chemo that I was, or cancer that I was dealing with initially. And I asked if that might be displayed. And it's a wonderful piece of artwork. Check him out, Robert Pope. He's got some marvelous artwork. Okay, I know I'm under pressure in terms of finishing up, so there's a question and answer. So I have a stage crew member. Dr. Chris McKinnon here is my stage crew, and he has 2 signs. Want to show them? So if it gets close to me running out of time, he's going to flash the exit sign and I'll hurry up. Okay. So he's not showing that to you, so you exit. Okay. Please don't stick around. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, the treatments and the consults for my first cancer took place in Halifax, where I had grown up. A 2.5-hour drive from Manigonish, where I have now lived for the past 50 years. Before or after these treatments, I would often walk downtown to St. Mary's Basilica to seek the silence and the tranquility of its grand interior. I always sat in the same pew, 2/3 up the far right-hand aisle, close to the stained glass windows that rose impressively within the outer wall there. It took 5 or 6 visits before I actually looked at the window that was closest to me. It depicted a bedraggled and exhausted Jonah lying face down on a rocky shore, the gaping maw of the great sea monster, which had just spat him up, still visible in the churning waters to his left. That was 25 years ago. And that was a perfect illustration how I felt then. And indeed, if I am honest, how I have often felt over the intervening years, right up to this day, this moment. The medical traumas of my family's past continue to trouble our present and are exacerbated by the grief and the heartbreak of our anticipated future. For my family, it would seem that the sea monster's appetite has yet to be satiated. Such is the curse of a generic illness that haunts and mocks my future and the future of my kids. and grandkids. There are times when thinking about my kids and grandkids that I am barely able to stand. Perhaps some of you here today have experienced similar periods of despondency. And perhaps, given that commonality of experiences, we might, however fleetingly, consider ourselves to be companions. I am fond of that word, companions. The prefix "com" means together, community, united together. And the base word is derived, interestingly enough, from the Latin word for bread, panis. Companions, then, are those with whom you would sit down to share the very ancient and most basic of meals. A loaf of bread, perhaps some wine, and with luck, congenial conversation. I have come quite a distance to be here today. I stand here today, ladies and gentlemen, seeking your companionship. And offering you my own, that we might both continue to stay standing, each one of us, that we might continue to care for family and stranger alike in the face of both personal and global challenges, the sea monsters that would currently have us despair. Ladies and gentlemen, I am humbled by the scholarship and the wisdom of the other speakers who have and will be addressing you through the National Grand Rounds project. I have no such scholarship. And the wisps of wisdom I might at times lay claim to often desert me when I am overwhelmed by my anxieties for my family and for myself. What I do have are stories of caring and stories of being cared for. They are humble gifts to offer you, to be sure, but perhaps they might be of some comfort, the comfort of a kind of solidarity, a community within an increasingly pervasive global atmosphere of divisiveness. So I have three main stories, and if Chris doesn't flash the signs, I'll get on to some smaller ones, okay? I'm paying him big bucks for this, okay? He wants credit. These stories, I picked these two stories because they display a certain spontaneity in terms of caregivers, but also because they are luminous. You know, I looked up luminous just to make sure I was using it correctly, okay? And it refers to the radiation energy being emitted from stars, but that's not the luminosity I'm talking about. I'm talking about the luminosity that sometimes comes shining through in moments of care, where the room lights up due to the relationship or the quality of the care being presented. So these are examples of that luminosity of palliative care at its finest, which is always palliative care in a relationship. Okay, so this is the first story. She strode, and these are true. She strode into the chemotherapy room like a Hollywood cowboy, brazenly pushing through the swinging barroom doors, her thin frame doing its best to catch up with her irrepressible spirit. She was 85 years old, ladies and gentlemen, a veteran of multiple debilitating cancers and their treatments. She strode in and she refused to sit down. Instead, she emphatically, magnificently announced to all of us gathered in that clinic that she wanted to dance. And she would not sit down until she did. She stared at each one of us patients, searching for a suitable partner, and each one of us, to our absolute shame, sought refuge from her gaze in the tangle of IV lines tethering us to our chairs. That was our excuse. Everybody's head went down. Suddenly, our boots were very interesting to look at. Okay. Stop sharing so people can see you. So we're in the middle of the dance. She was an amazing woman. I had met her during my treatment several times. But this was an extraordinary moment where she absolutely adamantly would not sit down and get her treatment unless she could dance. The medical staff, dressed in their protective gowns, stood transfixed. Dancing with patients was definitely not listed in their clinical orders for the day, nor had the subject of dancing with palliative care chemo patients ever been taught or even referenced as an essential therapeutic skill in the multiple years of training. Flight, fight, or freeze, they chose to freeze. Then one of the nurses, she was from Newfoundland. I say that because it was very much in keeping with her character. Then one of the nurses from Newfoundland emerged from the security of the nurses' station, cued the music therapist, and embracing our senior Cinderella, slowly danced her about the crowded floor. I want you to picture that. An 85-year-old willowy lady, multiple cancers, and she's waltzing around the floor. The nurse danced her out of the world of illness and its prescribed restrictions, danced her back into a world of exuberance and autonomy, that she had her way, not the illness. And the compassionate, spontaneous care of that nurse was responding to that. This is a restorative act, not just a dance, but this restores what is often lost when you are a cancer patient or any kind of patient, that sense of autonomy. That's me. Okay. And I'm losing this and losing this and losing this. And she comes in and says, no, no more. I dance before I sit for my other treatment. Patients' heads lifted in unison. Suddenly we're able to lift up our heads. And for one extended moment, transformed by the infectious delight of that resplendent 85-year-old and the inspired care of that nurse, both patients and professional caregivers alike were bound together within an equilibrium of mutual care and respect. I got to repeat that. An equilibrium of mutual care and respect. It was elevating for both the caregiver and that patient. I believe that caring for the welfare of others at its best, at its heart, can be an inherently dignified and dignifying way of being in the world for both the caregiver and the cared for. The equilibrium of mutual respect. I have not seen that lady since, and that nurse has since moved on. But that dance, ladies and gentlemen, remains an iconic challenge to me. I turned 77 in 2 days. I'm not 85. but that image of that 85-year-old multiple cancer survivor dancing, okay, to say at least, if not dancing in my own stumbling fashion, in spite of the heartache and the 1,000 shocks that flesh is heir to, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, as Shakespeare puts it. If not dancing, then at least I hope to stay standing. And maybe if nobody's looking, I'll dance. On the night my wife Sarah died, the attending nurses asked if I might want to lie down beside her. I had never considered that might be a possibility. The institutional bed being so narrow and Sarah so frail. I hesitated. The nurses, noting my uncertainty, carefully, gently arranged Sarah in such a way that with my back pressed against one wall, I could lie down beside her and embrace her as she lay dying. Some of you might not know how ruthless Huntington's can be. It's often accompanied by spastic movements, which prohibit the intimacy of partners who long to hold each other. Due to her Huntington's symptoms, it had been more than 10 years since I had been able to embrace her in bed. Our kids came in, Sarah's eyes opened at the sound of their voices. She tracked each one of them as they gathered around her, and as she noted each child in turn, her eyes filled with recognition. Now you got to remember how distant she had become. There was a moment, just a moment of her eyes filled with recognition, love, and a profound sorrow. It was a moment, just a moment of unanticipated and profoundly moving presence. She died with me, still holding her, minutes after our last child left the room, one day after my birthday, a few weeks short of our 47th wedding anniversary. I've always harbored the idea that she waited until my birthday was past, not wanting to have that linked to her death. Walt Whitman's poem by Walt Whitman. There was a child went forth every day, and the first object he looked upon, that object he became for the day or a certain part of the day or for years or stretching cycles of years. The early lilacs, the apple blossoms, the schooner sleepily dropping down the tide, the little boat slack-towed astern. These became a part of that child who went forth every day and who now goes forth and will always go forth every day. As with Whitman's child, I believe, so too with the dying and the loved ones gathered around them. It all becomes a part of us, ladies and gentlemen. All of it. You might dismiss all those small acts of kindness, of generosity, that hand on the shoulder. You might dismiss that. But I'd ask you not to, because it all remains, particularly in the memories of those loved ones. Exquisite kindness of those nurses in their care of Sarah, their creation of a place for me beside her became a part of me on that day and has remained a part of me for years and stretching cycles of years. Such is the lasting resonance of compassionate care. It resonates down the years. What for you might have been just one moment, but for me, the kindness of those nurses finding a way that I could lie down with my wife for 47 years resonates. A number of years after Sarah's death, I met a woman of my own age. We were members of a national palliative care committee. She had lost both husband and son to cancer. Our friendship evolved over time into a long-distance partnership. It was a remarkable, rejuvenating partnership for both of us. It was adolescent in its giddiness. We were like teenagers, but profoundly mature and touching in its depth and its inclusiveness. First time I went to her house to stay, she took me upstairs. Her husband was a Buddhist. She had an altar there, and she had 4 candles and 4 bouquets lit. And 1 candle was for her husband, 1 candle was for herself, 1 candle was for Sarah, 1 candle was for me. The relationship included those we had lost, didn't replace. On the night, Anya, less than 2 years after meeting Anya, she lay in a large urban hospital, critically ill from an aggressive brain cancer. Her decline was as precipitous as Sarah's had been slow. On the night that Anya died, in spite of the preliminary COVID restrictions which had been instituted, I was permitted to lie down beside her, just as I had done with Sarah. And during that night, a nurse came in to attend to the lady who shared Anya's room. Her bed separated from Anya's by the familiar thin privacy curtain, and middle of the night, large floor, all palliative care patients in Ontario. In the middle of the night, she began to sing. Ladies and gentlemen, she began to hum and sing an improvised lullaby to the elderly woman, addressing her by name in the solitude of her suffering. It was a lullaby as would be sung to a weary child in need of a comforting voice. Perhaps she had been a woman of no great import in the wider world. Her almost total lack of visitors over the previous weeks suggested that. But nevertheless, she was a woman found worthy of that man's voice, that man's attention, that man's consolation and care. In spite of the ubiquitous Hollywood steroid stereotypes, ladies and gentlemen, there's more than one way to be a man. Tenderness. Tenderness is one of them. Amid the din of hostile and contemptuous voices of our day, I think that fact of tenderness, as displayed by that gentleman, that man, needs to be championed. Anya died shortly after sunrise. Moments after her daughter arrived, there was a breath, a pause, and she slipped away like the mist over a river with the morning sun. I returned to Antigonish. It was Christmas, ironically, and I was exhausted. 4 weeks later, I received an unusually curt phone call from my family doctor, notifying me of my 3rd cancer diagnosis. It was a phone call. No invitation to come to your office. There's something we need to talk about. I thought he was joking. I laughed. I thought he was joking. You know, how can this be? Then I'm sick again. I think in retrospect, the uncharacteristic brevity and the clipped clinical tone of his call, he'd been my family doctor for 45 years, was due in no small measure to his own weariness of having to deliver yet another less than pleasant bit of news to my household. Caregivers, both professional and personal, are not immune to such debilitating exhaustion. Nor, it is worth noting, our entire communities, perhaps even civilizations, when faced with unrelenting traumas. The next story I've elicited the facts from an edition 2022 of Nature magazine. And it's about an anthropologist who discovered a 31,000-year-old skeleton. And the interesting thing was, it's a young man, and the bottom part of one leg had been amputated 31,000 years ago, okay? I want to make a point with this. He lived in Borneo 31,000 years ago. His bones showed evidence of a significant amputation. I'm quoting from that article. The surgeon, in quotation marks, is what, should we designate an individual 31,000 years ago as a surgeon? The surgeon who amputated this individual's lower leg must have possessed detailed knowledge of limb anatomy, muscular and vascular systems to prevent fatal blood loss and infection. There must have been intensive post-operative nursing, and care would have been vital. The wound would have been regularly cleaned, dressed, and disinfected, perhaps using locally available botanical resources with medicinal properties to prevent infection and provide anesthetics or pain relief. It is inferred that without a lower limb in a rugged and mountainous terrain, it presented a series of practical challenges, several of which can be assumed to have been overcome only by a high degree of community care. Okay, you get the point here? 31,000 years ago, it is inferred that life without a lower limb in a rugged and mountainous terrain presented a series of practical challenges, several of which can be assumed to have been overcome by a high degree of subsequent community care. Ladies and gentlemen, the eminent anthropologist Margaret Mead argues that more than the invention of the wheel or advances in agriculture, that healed wound of that young man, which required intensive post-operative nursing, followed by a high degree of community care, is the distinguishing cultural indicator that a civilization has come into being. It indicates the willingness of a group of people to care for an individual whose ability to contribute something back to his or her community has been significantly compromised. To be civilized then, which I suspect everybody in this room concludes we are, to be civilized then is fundamentally to care. Caring for the other is not incidental to the birth and continued flourishing of civilizations. There are voices afoot these days, okay, that will look upon that kind of caring as a weakness. That's why I stress this. If we are to continue to think of ourselves as being civilized, okay, to be civilized is to care. Caring for the other is not incidental in the birth and continued flourishing of civilizations. It is foundational. And he writes that the true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable. Is that what we are doing? Is that the way the world is shifting towards a spirited, charismatic effort to care for those who can't care for themselves? It doesn't seem like that to me. That's why it's so important that you keep doing what you're doing. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that the authentic, vulnerable, and compassionate relationship between a caregiver and the person being cared for, whether in personal or professional circumstances, is the ancient archetypal expression of human solidarity, linking us to all those who have gone before, all those who have practiced the healing arts down through the ages, linking us to that intensive post-operative nursing care and that high degree of community care. That's what Hope and Cope is about. High degree of community care, which allowed that amputee 31,000 years ago to continue to live for years after in his civil society, even though he can't contribute to that society. Such is the epitome, I believe, such is the epitome of what is best in us, that we should care for each other. Such is the very heart of what makes us a civilization. It is an ancient communal virtue worthy of being celebrated, nurtured, and protected for our own sake, for the sake of those who come after us, and in honor of those who have gone before. It is the fundamental essence of a civil society, incarnated with every new generation in the hearts and the minds and the souls of those who continue to care for the suffering. Years ago, before the smartphone was the camera of choice, I had a 35mm camera. It did not have an automatic focus. In my case, you would have to manually adjust the focus on the two identical images, which appeared in the viewing portal until they perfectly overlapped. Remember those cameras? Anybody have one of them? You had a focus and you had two images, okay? And when they came into focus, you could take the shot. Socrates prayed that the inner and the outer person would be as one. The poet Rumi suggests that when you do something from your soul, you feel a river running in you. Originally, ladies and gentlemen, the word job referred to a lump of something, which was in exchange for a lump of something else. A career, that word originally meant a raceway that you traveled about at high speed. Sometimes your career might feel like that, okay? But the word profession originally referenced the moment that a nun's training when she publicly declared the dedication of her life to the welfare of others. That's what profession originally meant, that I declare that I will dedicate my life to the welfare of others. Those were the first professions. Having made that public declaration, this is who I am, this is what I am going to do with my life, that none was said to be professed. I am certain there are days when caring feels like a job for you, and other times when it must feel like an exhausting raceway. My hope is that there might be days when it also feels like a profession. When who you are and what you are doing are as one in the service of others. When you are exactly where you feel you are meant to be. Doing exactly what you want to do in the service of others. This is who I am. A fortuitous synchronicity, a harmony of body, soul, and mind. And we're lucky to have moments when we feel like that. That's the way I feel about volunteering. A fortuitous synchronicity, a harmony of my body, as long as it lasts with these third assault, soul and mind in the service of others. Ladies and gentlemen, when I was a kid, there were no such things as community colleges. There were instead vocational schools. Anybody remember that? Okay, vocational schools. Well, vocation comes from Latin vocare. It means to be called. Okay, vocational schools identified whether you're going to be a plumber, a tradesman, a secretary, or whatever. There was a calling inferred. I believe that the practice of palliative and hospice care at its heart is a calling. I believe the rituals and ideals of such care affirm the elemental worth of both the caregiver and the cared for. I believe that the fundamental mission of palliative hospice care is the creation of sanctuaries of civility. If you go away from this speech not remembering anything, please remember that phrase. Sanctuaries. It comes from sanctus, Latin for holy. Sanctuaries, traditionally honored as refuge. That, I think, is what you can contribute to create sanctuaries of civility, the concrete expression of what is best in us as individuals and as people. Now, I'm going to rush, but oftentimes when I do these things, I talk about doctors and nurses. And I was made quite aware recently about the fact that there's a whole bunch of other people who are part of a palliative care unit. And because of sort of inherent hierarchies of who's important and who's not, those people can often be forgotten that they are significant caregivers. So quick little series of stories of people who have impressed me, but don't wear white coats, don't have stethoscopes, and don't take your temperature. I believe palliative care also involves employees such as the diminutive cleaning lady, her black hairnet, broom taller than herself, yellow rubber gloves coming up to the elbows of her thin arms, who stopped her labors one day to ask me about books that she might enjoy. I'm alone. I'm in isolation. This lady comes in to clean the room. Everybody else medical has come in and gone out, having extracted the information they want, the clinical information. But she stopped and asked me about books. And that conversation was the very first time in weeks of hospitalization when I felt seen as a person, not just a pathology. The music therapist, shifting intuitively from old-time country to rock and roll, folk, Broadway hits, or traditional Celtic laments, that she might harmonize both the tone of her voice and the lyric of her song to the heart and soul of this specific patient at this specific moment in his or her illness. What a gift. The social worker who bought Montreal Canadian pennants, and I'm not just saying that because I'm in Montreal, it was. The social worker who bought Montreal Canadian pennants, pillowcases, banners for a palliative care patient who was dying alone, far from home, for whom conversations about the likes of Rocket Richard, Boom Boom Geoffrion, some of you might remember those names, Jean Beliveau, were the one thing that restored a spark of vitality to his eyes. There's those gestures, those luminous gestures. The woman from the dietary staff who visited patient units at least multiple times a day, lighting up the place every time with her natural buoyancy and gestures of goodwill. She imagined those ladies, those visits, ladies and gentlemen, as being about more than the efficient delivery of food. She imagined them as opportunities for caring. How the way we imagine ourselves is translated into care. We imagine ourselves as just dropping off food and then gathering it back. But she thought of herself as being a visitor that could contribute to the care. And this is weird, I know. And then there was the eccentric elevator operator on the 8th floor of the large urban hospital, where I was a patient during my second cancer, who had decorated her service elevator with everything Hawaiian, including himself. Shorts, loud shirts, flowers, necklaces. All day long, he ferried the extremely ill people up and down in the elevator, offering each of them fleeting moments of hospitality and companionship and color. Color. Such a reinvigorating vacation from the concrete basement tomb, every wall of which was painted a depressing green. You remember those? Depressing green. It was like somebody in the hospital had stock on green paint. Depressing green where our scans or x-rays would take place and our futures were prophesied. Hate those moments when they knew and I didn't know. They would just excuse you from the room. And then there are other volunteers. Simone Weil, the French philosopher, writes that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. Say it again. Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. This is the gift that palliative care volunteers bring every time they enter a patient's room, the gift of attention, the gift of listening, the gift of companionship. In my many years of volunteering, I have never met a single patient who didn't have a story to tell. I believe the heart of volunteering is to listen intently to those stories, because in doing so, the storyteller feels affirmed, feels worthy of your attention, feels recognized. And I ask you to think about the word recognized. The RE means, again, cognized comes associated with the word cognition. So to recognize somebody is to know them again, to know them fresh, not just that melanoma patient, okay, but to see them afresh. That's what it means when we say, I recognize you. In a palliative care circumstance, it's deeper than that, it's profound. I believe the definition of palliative care, I'm going to skip that. But you get the point. The entire staff can be elevated in the sense of worthiness, depending upon how you, perhaps as managers, as whatever, acknowledge that worthiness. And that elevates them. It elevates them. From the very first person, okay? Whether they're laundry workers, my wife worked in the lab until she reached a point where she came home in tears and said she couldn't anymore because she was afraid she wasn't getting the results correct because her Huntington's was starting to interfere. The labs are always seem to be down in the basement of wherever it is, hardly ever recognized, and yet everything goes back to them in terms of the quality of care. I came here today, ladies and gentlemen, in honor of, I say her name, Sheila Kussner, right? Okay. Kussner. I wrote it down, Sheila Kussner. Her inspirational vision, her seemingly inexhaustible energies. I came to publicly champion her, to espouse her mission, which was to repair the world through the power of empathy. It is an urgent mission, a noble and ennobling way of being in the world. A noble and ennobling way of being in the world. W.H. Auden, a poem. I sit in one of the dives on 52nd Street, uncertain and afraid, as the clever hopes expire of a low, dishonest decade. These lines are particularly, I think, appropriate given the days. Waves of anger and fear circulate over the bright and darkened lands of the earth, obsessing our lives. Yet dotted everywhere, ironic points of light flash out. May I compose like them, of arrows and of dust, show an affirming flame. I honor you, ladies and gentlemen. I praise and celebrate you. I encourage you to hold fast to your professed visions of a civilized society. I encourage you to continue to show the affirming flame that Auden mentions. It is important that you do, not just for those who come directly under your care, but for the world itself and all its inhabitants, for all things bright and beautiful, all creatures great and small. It is important that you do so on a personal level for the sake of my kids and my grandkids. I am not going to see their illness through. Three of them sick at the same time. One of them having to care for that, three of them. I won't see that through. I am counting on you. A word to those who are personally caring for a loved one. My hope is that you are surrounded by a steadfast host of companions who will abide with you throughout what can often be a profoundly challenging and isolating journey. Take refuge within the circle of companions that they might hold you, take care of you, so you might continue in your own caring for a loved one. How much time? Gotta go. Okay. I'll read you a blessing. I love that gesture. There's a blessing written by an Irish writer by the name of John O'Donoghue, and it was dedicated to his aging mother. On the day when the weight deadens on your shoulders and you stumble, may the clay dance to balance you, and may there come across the waters a path of yellow moonlight to bring you home. And may the nourishment of the earth be yours, and may the clarity of light be yours, and may the fluency of the ocean be yours, and may the protection of the ancestors be yours. And so may a slow wind work these words of love and admiration around you, an invisible cloak to mind your life. That was poem he wrote to his aging mother, and I would like to just read the last part of it as my wish to all of you. Okay. May the nourishment, ladies and gents, of the earth be yours. May the clarity of light be yours. The fluency of the ocean be yours. And may the protection of the ancestors be yours. And so may a slow wind work these words of love and admiration around you, an invisible cloak to mind your life. I would like to thank all of the National Grand Rounds Committee members for inviting me here, taking care of me along the way, and the people of Hope and Cope who have inspired me today to carry on. And I would like to thank all of you who were kind enough to listen to me. Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. It has been an absolute honor to be in your presence. And finally, in honor of Miss Kussner, our waltzing 85-year-old Cinderella, and all those in need of care near and far, thought it appropriate to read a few lines from one of your native sons, Mr. Leonard Cohen, when he writes, "Ring the bells that still can ring. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. We do what we can, ladies and gentlemen. We do what we can imperfectly, but please continue to do so for the sake of the world and the people you care for. Thank you.
This concludes the Sheila Kussner Hope and Cope lecture in the McGill Palliative Care National Grand Round Series, sponsored on this occasion by the Hope and Cope Wellness Center. We are so grateful to Jim for his wisdom and his time with us today. Thank you, Jim, for sharing. And also we're thankful for all of you for attending today. We ask you to please complete the evaluation form that you can access with this QR code and that we will send you soon by email. We look forward to seeing you again next month on April 30th for the lecture to be given by Dr. Claire Kratzfeld at the Montreal Neurological Institute. Thank you, everyone, et à la prochaine.